Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. There's something moving through your energy right now that wasn't there before. Something that arrived quietly without announcement, without asking permission, and settled into the space between who you present yourself to be and who you actually are when no one is watching. Something that has been living in that gap with a patience that's starting to feel less like stillness and more like pressure. And the thing about Virgo, the thing that almost no one talks about because it doesn't fit the neat, orderly, analytical image that gets attached to this sign, is that beneath all that careful management of the surface, there is an interior life of extraordinary intensity, one that very few people ever get access to, one that you have spent considerable energy over a considerable period of time, making sure stays exactly where it is, underneath, contained, legible only to you. In the private hours when the performance of composure gets to rest and whatever is actually present in you is allowed to simply exist without being observed or interpreted or judged by anyone whose opinion might complicate things. But something may be getting harder to contain right now. Let's talk about what Virgo actually carries, not the version that ends up in generalizations, but the real texture of it. There's a particular kind of knowing that lives in you, not the showy kind, not the kind that announces itself in conversation or positions itself visibly so others can register how perceptive you are. Something quieter and more uncomfortable than that, a capacity to see things clearly, often before others do, often before the situation has revealed enough of itself for the seeing to feel justified. You notice things that weren't meant to be noticed. The slight inconsistency in what someone said versus how they said it. The moment where another person's energy shifted in a way they didn't consciously register themselves. The gap between what's being presented and what's actually happening, that gap is almost always visible to you, even when you say nothing about it. Even when saying something would only complicate a situation, you've already decided, for your own reasons, to let proceed undisturbed, and you say nothing. Often. More often than people realize. Because one of the things that genuinely doesn't get said about Virgo is how much you absorb in silence, how much you process internally that never makes it to the surface. How much of your actual experience of any given situation, any given relationship, any given dynamic lives entirely in your own interior, observed and analyzed and felt with a precision that would surprise most of the people who think they know you well. They know the version you've decided to offer them, which is a real version, not a performance exactly, not a mask in the cheap sense of that word, but a curated one that leads with competence and reliability and the reassuring quality of someone who appears to have things managed, because appearing to have things managed is something you learned somewhere along the way was both useful and protective. But there's so much more underneath that. Here's what no one is supposed to know. You feel things with a depth that your exterior almost never communicates. There's an emotional intensity in you specific, particular, attached to the people and situations that matter to you that would genuinely shock some of the people in your life if they could see it directly. Not because it's dramatic, not because it expresses itself in the loud, visible ways that emotional intensity is supposed to look like from the outside, but because of how much it costs you to carry it quietly. The care you extend privately, consistently, without requiring acknowledgement for the people who occupy the inner circle of your life. The way you think about them when they're not present. The way you notice when something is off with them, often before they've noticed it themselves. The way you absorb their difficulty alongside your own, folding it into the internal processing that runs more or less continuously beneath the surface of your ordinary functioning. That's not the Virgo people talk about. They talk about the perfectionism, the analysis, the critical eye, the high standards. And yes, those things are real and they're yours. But they exist in the same interior as something far more tender than the reputation suggests. A capacity for devotion, for loyalty, for a quality of love that expresses itself less in grand gestures and more in the accumulated evidence of 1,000 small, consistent, quietly offered acts of care that most people receive without ever fully registering where they came from or what they cost. You give a great deal that goes unseen. And there may be something in you, something that has been patient for a very long time, that has absorbed a great deal of that invisibility with a grace that was hard won rather than natural, that is starting to ask quietly but with increasing insistence whether being seen might finally be possible, whether there is someone or something approaching your life that might finally meet the actual you, not the managed version, not the capable version, not the version that makes other people comfortable, but the one underneath all of that. There's a secret you may be keeping even from yourself. Not something dark, not something that requires confession or correction, something softer than that, and in some ways more difficult to admit precisely because of its softness. Something that lives in the register of wanting, of genuine, specific, undefended wanting, which is a register that Virgo doesn't always find easy to inhabit, honestly, because wanting requires a kind of exposure that analysis can't protect you from. You can analyze a situation indefinitely and never have to declare what you actually hope it becomes. You can observe, assess, identify every possible risk and complication and reason for caution, and as long as you're in that mode, you're safe. The wanting stays theoretical. The feeling stays at a manageable distance from the part of you that would have to feel it fully if you ever stopped processing it long enough to simply be in it. But it's there, underneath the analysis, underneath the caution, underneath the very reasonable, very well constructed case you've been building for why this particular thing, this particular person, this particular possibility, this particular version of your life that you haven't yet allowed yourself to fully imagine might not be worth the risk of actually wanting. It's there anyway. And it may have been there for longer than you've been willing to officially acknowledge. Living in you with the patience of something that knows it has time, that knows you'll eventually stop arguing with it, eventually stop finding new reasons to keep it at a theoretical distance, and is simply waiting for the moment when the argument finally exhausts itself and what's actually true is allowed to be present without being immediately subjected to the next round of examination. Something may be shifting in the landscape around you in a way that's specific to this period. An alignment of circumstances, not dramatic, not announced, but real, that may be creating conditions for something to surface that has been waiting for exactly this kind of opening. A convergence between what's been developing internally in you and what may be approaching from the external world. A meeting point between the version of yourself that's been quietly becoming and the version of your life that may be quietly reorganizing itself to accommodate what that person needs. There may be a connection that's about to deepen. Not necessarily a new one, more likely something already present in your life, already part of the landscape, already carrying a particular warmth or significance that may be on the verge of revealing a new layer of itself, of stepping out of the role it's been occupying in the periphery of your attention and moving towards something more central, more demanding of your genuine presence, more requiring of the you that exists beneath the careful management of what you allow others to see. And the question, the quiet, persistent, slightly uncomfortable question, is whether you'll let it. Whether, when the moment arrives that asks you to be more present than managed, more open than protected, more genuinely in something than observing it from a considered distance, whether you'll find a way to choose the presence over the safety of the analysis. That may be the real invitation of this period. Let's talk about what Virgo is like when they finally decide to let someone in. Because it doesn't happen often, and it doesn't happen quickly. And it doesn't happen without a level of internal deliberation that most people would find exhausting if they could see it, the weighing, the considering, the patient accumulation of evidence, the slow movement from cautious to certain that is entirely invisible from the outside and entirely real on the inside. But when it happens, when Virgo makes the decision that someone is worth the full weight of their actual presence, what that person receives is extraordinary. Not in the showy sense, in the sense that matters more and lasts longer, the sense of being known, of having someone pay the kind of attention to the specific details of your experience that most people simply don't have the capacity for, of being cared for in ways that are precisely calibrated to what you actually need rather than what's easiest to offer, of being seen, really seen by someone whose seeing is more accurate than almost anyone else's. That's what you're capable of offering when you let yourself. And it's possible that someone in your life, someone who may be closer than the current arrangement of things, has allowed either of you to fully acknowledge, already senses that, already feels, in whatever limited access they currently have to your actual interior, that there is something remarkable underneath the surface, something worth the patience it would take to earn real access to it, something they may be moving toward. Here is what no one is supposed to know about this period for Virgo. There may be a softening happening, not a collapse of the careful structure you've built, not a sudden abandonment of the discernment and self-protection that have served you well, but a subtle, almost imperceptible relaxation of something that has perhaps been held more tightly than it needed to be. A gradual willingness to consider that the evidence in favor of opening might, in this particular case, with this particular configuration of circumstances, outweigh the evidence in favor of continued caution. That softening is not weakness. It's something closer to wisdom, the recognition that the same intelligence that built the walls is also capable of identifying when the walls have served their purpose and a different kind of protection is now available. One that doesn't require the same degree of enclosure, one that comes not from distance but from the kind of genuine self-knowledge that allows you to be fully present in something without losing yourself inside it. You may be approaching that kind of self-knowledge right now. It may be arriving not as an insight, but as a feeling, a quality of readiness that you didn't manufacture, that simply appeared one day in the texture of how you're relating to your own life. A sense that something you've been waiting for without always knowing you were waiting, without always being willing to admit what you were waiting for, may finally be within range of receiving.